Trump just flipped decades of U.S. foreign policy on its head. At a heated press conference, he made an announcement that could change the Middle East forever. As far as Gaza is concerned, we'll do what is necessary. If it's necessary, we'll do that. But what does that even mean? Is Trump serious? And could U.S. troops really be deployed into Gaza? The answers are even more shocking than you think. For decades, the U.S. has played mediator in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and on February 5th, Trump took part in talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But Trump's latest statement throws that entire approach out the window. Though always entrenched in its strong support of Israel, the U.S. has traditionally, quote, tried to advance a diplomatic solution that would reconcile the competing claims of the two parties, according to the Council on Foreign Relations. Many previous U.S. administrations have proposed roadmaps that could lead to permanent peace between the two bitter rivals, suggesting the U.S. supported a two-state solution. But Donald Trump just blew this decades-long approach out of the water. So what exactly did he say? The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it too. We'll own it, said Trump at the White House following his discussion with Netanyahu. The goal is to turn the region into the Riviera of the Middle East, with Trump appearing to believe that he can transform the Gaza Strip into a kind of holiday resort that would, quote, supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Of course, taking over would include sending U.S. personnel in to clear destroyed buildings and dismantle dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons. Trump claimed that the U.S. would take long-term ownership over the territory, with the idea being to send the Palestinians currently living in the Gaza Strip to other countries while the U.S. transforms the region. Once the transformation is complete, Trump envisions people from all over the world living there. The world's people would become the Strip's residents, according to the U.S. president, including Palestinians if they still wanted to live in Gaza. It's an extremely audacious plan, to say the least. It's also one that completely disregards the decades of deep-rooted religious and territorial conflict that have defined Israel and Palestine. And the backlash has been swift, making it clear that pulling this off won't be easy, despite Trump's bold claim that, quote, everybody loves the idea. But at least Netanyahu hasn't outright rejected it. When asked about Trump's comments, he carefully noted that the U.S. president sees a different future for Gaza, without clarifying whether that vision aligns with his own. Still, he hinted at support, adding, I think it's something that could change history. But there's another layer to this story, one that is deeply personal for Netanyahu. This isn't just about Gaza, it's about his own freedom. In November 2024, the International Criminal Court, or ICC, issued an arrest warrant for Israel's prime minister, alleging reasonable grounds that Netanyahu, along with former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and Hamas leader Mohammed Daif, bears criminal responsibility for war crimes during the Israel-Hamas conflict. Netanyahu dismissed these charges, calling the ICC anti-Semitic, but here's the key factor: the U.S. doesn't recognize the ICC, meaning it has no legal obligation to arrest him. For Netanyahu, aligning with Trump may be less about supporting a U.S.-controlled Gaza and more about ensuring America remains his shield against international prosecution. But other world leaders didn't hold back. Saudi Arabia immediately condemned Trump's comments, reaffirming its, quote, firm and unshakable support for an independent Palestinian state. The kingdom made it clear Trump's plan isn't peace, it's occupation. Several of the countries Trump suggested as destinations for displaced Palestinians have outright rejected his plan. He proposed that Egypt and Jordan take in Palestinians while the U.S. gets to work in Gaza. But both nations swiftly refused, making it clear they won't be part of his vision. The United Arab Emirates and Qatar also slammed Trump's Gaza plan, warning it would threaten the region's stability, risk expanding the conflict, and undermine prospects for peace and coexistence among its people. And of course, the U.S. would still have to deal with Hamas, who lambasted the idea by claiming that it was a recipe for creating chaos and tension in the region. In a statement published in the wake of Trump's comments, the terrorist group simply stated, "Our people in the Gaza Strip will not allow these plans to pass." In other words, if Trump sends U.S. troops into Gaza, they should be prepared to fight Hamas for every scrap of territory the U.S. tries to claim. Trump is facing backlash at home, too. Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy didn't mince words, posting on X that Trump has, quote, totally lost it, adding, "I have news for you, we aren't taking over Gaza." Of course, Murphy is on the opposite side of the U.S. political fence to the Republican Trump, making his opposition to most of Trump's plans a given. However, his comments may signal a broader bipartisan shock at the idea of the U.S. abandoning decades of foreign policy to seize control of Gaza. Still, despite the overwhelming opposition, we are really faced with the reality of what if Trump actually follows through and sends U.S. troops into Gaza? It's a real possibility. After all, Trump has already taken steps that paved the way for military involvement. That includes a February 4th executive order that withdraws U.S. support from UNRWA, the United Nations agency responsible for aiding Palestinian refugees. Israel had criticized the existence of UNRWA in the past and outlawed it entirely on January 30th, claiming it has ties to terrorist organizations like Hamas. The U.S. withdrawal from UNRWA signals that Trump doesn't believe in the agency's mission, which has provided relief to Palestinians since Israel's founding in 1948. It also suggests he shares Israel's view that UNRWA has problematic connections and should be dismantled. Trump's claims and executive orders are already having real-world effects too, and could wreak havoc on the ceasefire that currently exists between Israel and Hamas. That temporary truce was signed in mid-January and lasts until March 1st. It's already resulted in the release of around 2,000 Palestinian prisoners from Israel, with 33 Israeli captives going the other way. Negotiations for a second phase of that ceasefire are already underway, according to Hamas, with that phase potentially seeing the full withdrawal of all Israeli troops from Gaza. Trump's comments might now blow up that entire second phase. After all, why would Israel consider ending its war against Hamas if it knows there's potential for one of the biggest geopolitical allies to move into the Gaza Strip? So, you could argue that Trump is methodically setting the stage for a U.S. invasion of Gaza. His executive orders have severed U.S. ties with the United Nations agencies that protect Palestinians, and because the U.S. doesn't recognize the ICC, Trump faces no legal barriers to working with Netanyahu on a Gaza takeover. Everything appears to be falling into place for Trump to deploy U.S. troops into the region. But if that happens, what would the battle look like? First, let's be clear. This wouldn't be an even fight, it would be an annihilation. The U.S. military is a global superpower, while Hamas is fighting with limited weapons and guerrilla tactics. Global firepower, which ranks the top 145 military nations in the world based on over 60 metrics, puts the U.S. as the world's most powerful military, with 1.3 million active personnel and around 800,000 in reserves. Its arsenal includes over 13,000 aircraft, 4,640 tanks, nearly 400,000 military vehicles, and a navy of 440 ships, all backed by an $850 billion annual defense budget. Hamas is absolutely tiny in comparison. The U.S. Director of National Intelligence estimates that before its October 7, 2023 attack on Israel, Hamas had 20,000 to 25,000 fighters, a number that has since dwindled. Even at full strength, Hamas had less than 2% of the U.S.'s active military. Weapons-wise, the gap is just as severe. Hamas relies primarily on improvised rockets and mortars, with limited anti-tank and anti-air capabilities. Small arms aren't a problem for Hamas, as it has a surplus of RPG-7s and Norinco Type 56-1 automatic rifles. But surplus is a relative term. In this case, it means more than the 20,000 or so needed to arm everyone in Hamas, which is still practically nothing compared to America's equipment levels. Add the U.S. Navy into the mix, against which Hamas has no defense, and a U.S. Air Force that features fighter jets that can easily avoid the primitive manpads available to Hamas. And any war between the U.S. and Hamas should be a curb-stomping in favor of the American forces. That's assuming a fight would even be necessary. After all, over a year of fighting with Israel has already significantly weakened Hamas's military. Israel claims to have already killed 17,000 of Hamas's fighters, which would reduce the group to between 3,000 and 8,000 if the DNI figures are accurate. Armed Conflict and Event Data, or ACLED, disputes Israel's numbers, stating that more detailed reports suggest that there have been 8,500 militant fatalities. Either way, the U.S. troops entering the Gaza Strip would be dealing with a very weakened Hamas, which means less of a chance of contact and fewer instances of Hamas's guerrilla tactics impacting America's troops. That's good news for Trump and his plan. Israel also claims to have established control in 4 of the 5 governorates in the Gaza Strip since October 2023. Again, ACLED questions that claim, saying that Hamas has shown an ability to regroup and is still actively fighting in several of those locations. But that doesn't change the fact that Israel has established bases and command centers throughout the Gaza Strip, all of which America's troops could use to effectively conduct cleanup in the region. The U.S. is also believed to maintain at least one base in Israel, meaning it already has troops in the country that Trump could use to take over Gaza. Plus, Netanyahu's comments about Trump's idea potentially being good for the region likely means that he would cooperate with the U.S. and allow it to use the bases he has in his own country. That offers plenty of staging areas for American assaults. The U.S. could even consider sending its Navy through the Mediterranean Sea to essentially encircle the Gaza Strip, giving the Hamas militants in the area little chance of escape. Add to all of this the 45,400 American soldiers stationed in nearby countries, including Syria, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, and Jordan. And the U.S. already has a force that's over twice as large as Hamas ready to go. Guerrilla warfare tactics would still be a problem for America's troops. That's been Hamas's dominant form of warfare since May 2024, according to ACLED, likely as a response to Israel's ground forces being too powerful to fight directly. Hamas would even try to use explosives and asymmetric attacks to whittle away at America's forces, but even that seems like a strategy that's unlikely to succeed. Guerrilla warfare has worked against the U.S. in the past, most notably in Vietnam and Afghanistan. However, the Gaza Strip is just 140 square miles. That is tiny compared to the territories where the U.S. has encountered guerrilla warfare in the past, allowing it to more effectively manage the threats it would face. If Trump is able to get other countries to agree to take in Palestinian refugees who don't want to be a part of the fighting, which seems unlikely given the responses of countries he's suggested so far, the U.S. might not even have to put many boots on the ground in Gaza. It could work with Israel to carry out airstrikes against an evacuated Gaza Strip, destroying what remains of the territory and forcing Hamas out in the process. As devastating as that would be for the area, it's an approach that seems to align well with Trump's claims that he wants to turn the Gaza Strip into the Riviera of the Middle East. He could use the U.S. military to essentially raze everything in Gaza to the ground, setting the stage for America's rebuilding efforts. And that brings us to the biggest question of all. Why does Trump want Gaza? Is this about security or something much, much bigger? The surface-level answer is that Trump may almost see his plans for Gaza as being somewhat similar to one of the real estate deals for which he became famous. We get hints of that from his Riviera comments, as well as his claims that the U.S. would level the buildings in Gaza to create an economic development that provides the people living there with new homes and jobs. Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, has also made reference to Gaza having very valuable waterfront property. Kushner, who's married to Trump's daughter Ivanka, made those comments back in March 2024, almost a year before Trump claimed the U.S. should take over Gaza. He suggested that Israel should remove civilians from the region by sending them to camps in the Negev desert, allowing it to clean up the strip for property development. "I would just bulldoze something in the Negev," Kushner claimed when revealing his plan for resolving the Israel-Palestinian conflict. "I would try to move people in there. I think that's a better option, so you can go in and finish the job." Israel didn't do that. The Negev desert is in Israel's south, and it's unlikely that Netanyahu would approve any sort of development that could potentially enable Hamas to infiltrate into his country. But perhaps Trump took Kushner's comments to heart and simply tweaked the plan into what he presented on February 5th. However, America's president likely doesn't have real estate on his mind. There's something else very valuable that a military takeover of Gaza would provide to the United States: an even stronger foothold in the Middle East. Think about Trump's plan for a moment. It involves the displacement of around 2 million people from Gaza, perhaps forcibly, to clear out the territory. American soldiers would fight and likely eliminate the few Hamas fighters that remain. Once America took control, it would be able to build military bases and perhaps even set up a naval base that would allow it to control a portion of the Mediterranean Sea. That entry point into the Mediterranean would also enable the U.S. to station ships and soldiers near Lebanon and Syria, with the former being home to Hezbollah militants that the U.S. would like to rein in. A Gaza base would also supplement the 45,400 troops stationed in countries surrounding Israel that we mentioned earlier. The problem, if this is part of Trump's plan, is the level of opposition he faces from the nations he's tried to bring on board with his idea. Saudi Arabia has already said it doesn't support Trump's plan. Jordan and Egypt said no to taking in displaced Palestinians. You also have to believe that Iran would have something to say about U.S. intervention in Gaza. After all, Hamas fighters have received weapons and training from Iran, with some going so far as to claim Hamas as a proxy for Iran, so it has influence in a territory near Israel. The U.S. taking over Gaza would ruin that influence, potentially sparking conflict with Iran that would throw the Middle East into turmoil. So Trump's plan isn't perfect, but perhaps it isn't meant to be. After all, there's a chance that all of these comments could be yet another bluff by America's president. The Atlantic Council believes that might be a possibility. Writing for the publication, Jonathan Lemire says, Trump has been known to first take an outlandish position and then move to a more moderate stance. Sometimes there is a method to his madness, and sometimes there is simple madness in his madness. World leaders from Denmark to Panama to the Middle East have spent the past 2 weeks trying to discern the difference. Perhaps Lemire has a point. After all, Trump has typically taken an anti-US intervention approach in the past, though that approach has always been tinged with Trump's claims that the US is bankrolling other countries' defense, as we see with the claims he makes about NATO and most recently Canada. Taking over Gaza would be different, as the US would be paying its own way and claiming territory. Still, there may be a method to the madness, as Lemire claims. That view was supported by Mark Dubowitz in a post on X. The CEO of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies wrote, "It occurs to me that Trump may have floated this idea to raise the stakes after Arab countries refused to take in Palestinians. Now he's cranking up the pressure. If you won't take them, we'll remove them ourselves and take control of Gaza." Classic Trump. Go to the extreme, making what once seemed outrageous suddenly look like the reasonable middle ground. Trump may have no intention to send US soldiers into Gaza. It might all be a ploy, a ruse, a trick he's using to get the countries that have balked at his idea of sending Palestinians to live in their territories to capitulate to him because they fear the chaos the US taking over Gaza could create in the Middle East. And if the trick works, Trump would still get his way. Palestinians move out of Gaza, and the US, likely working alongside Israel, would rebuild the territory. Whatever the case may be, one thing is clear. Trump has shocked the world with his Gaza claims. But has he shocked you? What do you think about the possibility of US intervention in Gaza that would lead to a takeover of the territory? Is Trump serious, or is he trying to bluff his way into getting what he and Israel want? Let us know in the comments, and thank you for watching this video.